Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. And now is for everybody's favorite part of the show where I get to read off the disclaimer statement. So y'all bear with me. Hopefully, if you are doing side bets or prop bets, I think the over-under on mess ups is two. So we'll see. Our Unite virtual forum is educational and supportive in nature and will offer self-care strategies to help you in your daily life. However, the group will not engage in rendering any psychological or healthcare advice for any particular individual or situation and will not provide medical, mental health, or any other type of health related service. No diagnosis, treatment recommendations, medical advice, or any other type of medical or mental health recommendations will be offered. Our support group is not a substitute for or alternative to treatment by a licensed medical professional. Always seek the advice of your own physician or any qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding your medical condition. The Hypersomnia Foundation does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, lawyers, legal advisors, products, medications, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be referenced on its website or during any online support groups. So, with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bruce Corser. Dr. Bruce Corser is currently the medical director at three Cincinnati area medical facilities, including Sleep Management Institute, your MD, and Intrepid Research. He received his medical degree from State University of New York's Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse in 1980 and completed his postgraduate training at the University of Cincinnati. He is board certified in internal medicine, pulmonary, and sleep medicine. He has extensive clinical trial experience and has held the position of investigator in several hundred clinical trials for a variety of medical conditions. His research has focused on sleep related issues, including sleep apnea, insomnia, narcolepsy, restless leg syndrome, and excessive sleepiness. Dr. Corser has co authored numerous articles, including over 30 publications in journals such as Sleep and the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, and as a member of many professional organizations, including the American College of Physicians and the AASM. He was voted top sleep medicine physician in Ohio by Vitals for 2020 through 2024. He was also voted top sleep doctor in the Cincinnati Magazine. So that's his official bio. I'm actually here to just talk a little bit about Dr. Corser as a person. I had a chance to meet Dr. Corser at this last year's sleep conference, and I certainly love so many of our sleep physicians, but their ability to be approached and engaged it varies dramatically. And I can say that Dr. Corser was actually one of the kindest and most generous folks around. He actually talked out in a lobby of a hotel. I just walked up to him, asked for a selfie. Which is not rare, but introduced myself, and he was very generous with his time and his attention. If you guys don't know what Dr. Corser does, you're about to learn. He's helped transform our understanding and the treatment options that are available for the narcolepsy and IH community. And I can't give a whole lot more better compliments than just, you know, he is one of the guys, if not the guys, for clinical trials in the area. So with that, I'm going to pass the ball to you, Dr. Corser, and I will also ask if anyone has any questions, please leave them in the chat and keep yourself on mute throughout the presentation. There will be some times for question and answers afterwards. So pass it over to you.
So thank you all for joining today. It's an honor to speak with this group, and I hope I can convey some information that's useful to you. So first, I want to talk a little bit about what helps us stay awake and what helps us or causes us to be sleepy. So as you may all know, there's half a dozen neurochemicals in our brain that help us stay awake through the day. These neurochemicals include serotonin, norepinephrine, histamine, dopamine, acetylcholine, and probably the master neurochemical, which is called orexin, that stabilizes the sleep-wake cycle. And there's several neurochemicals that cause us to be drowsy. These include GABA, galanin, and adenosine. So, in fact, the longer we're awake, the more adenosine accumulates in the basal forebrain. That's part of the brain, and so the more we are awake, the more adenosine accumulates, and that's thought to cause excessive sleepiness. That's called the homeostatic regulation of sleep, and it's thought to be mediated mostly through adenosine. So interestingly, caffeine is an adenosine receptor blocker. So So drinking caffeine transiently blunts the effect of adenosine in our brain and causes us to be a little more wakeful when the caffeine is in our system. So that's a brief overview of the chemicals involved. Now, why is that important? It's important because all of these medicines that are being looked at or being developed for treatment of IH and narcolepsy focus on these different neurochemicals. And we can go through some of the trials that are currently underway or that have recently been concluded. So let's start first with oxybate therapy. So, as you know, the only approved medication right now for treatment of IH is Xywav, which is Jazz's uh, low sodium oxybate preparation. So how does that work? How does oxybate work? Well, it's very interesting. So oxybate therapy, that's the other word for sodium oxybate or gamma hydroxybutyrate. So gamma hydroxybutyrate is an endogenous chemical in our brain. And it's not clear exactly what this chemical does, but there is a gamma hydroxybutyrate receptor in the brain. So oxybate binds to this GHB receptor at low doses, and at higher doses, it binds to what's called the GABA B receptor. So at very low doses, oxybate causes euphoria. In fact, if you take 1 or 2 grams of oxybate, it causes this euphoric feeling. That's why, back in the day, it was used as a club drug in Europe. It was popular because it causes euphoria. It caused people to be able to focus and maintain attention better. Because at low doses, it binds preferentially to this GHB receptor, which is activating. So, but at higher doses, when you get up to doses above 3 grams, it starts causing profound sedation. And as you may know, the therapeutic dose of oxybate usually is between 6 and 9 grams taken through the night. Now, the standard oxybate preparation is very short lived. In fact, the half life of of the standard oxybate preparation is about 45 minutes. So then the duration of effect of oxybate, which is that's Xywav, is probably about 3 to 4 hours. So that's why you have to take 1 dose of Xywav at sleep onset and a second dose of Xywav, about 4 hours later, because of this very short half life. So when so very low doses of oxybate, there's dopamine released into the brain. So as I said, it's very activating at low doses. But then when you get up to higher doses, the gamma hydroxybutyrate or oxybate binds preferentially to the GABA B receptors, which cause profound sedation. And that's because there's a profound suppression of dopamine in the brain at higher doses. So it's very interesting effect. So low doses, it's activating. At high doses, it's very sedating and causes a very significant increase in deep sleep. Usually, there's about a 30 to 40% increase in deep sleep with these oxybate preparations. So, so Xywav, when you take it at higher doses, it causes people to be very sleepy and drop off and have a big increase in deep sleep. And then as it wears off, the GHB receptors are activated, which causes activation. So it causes people to be very sleepy during the night. But as the blood level of oxybate decreases, you get this rebound in dopamine. So it allows people to wake up better in the morning. So that's why when you take oxybate preparations at night, they really knock people out, but then they cause people to be able to awaken better in the morning. So, and as you all know, this is one of the biggest problems in people with IH in particular, the sleep inertia, the difficulty to awaken in the morning. So, I found that the oxybate preparations are very helpful to allow people to awake in the morning. And plus, it increases people's ability to maintain wakefulness during the day, probably as a result of this rebound dopamine effect. It really causes a significant rebound in dopamine during the day because it's suppressed at night. So currently, as I mentioned, Xywav is the only medication indicated for treatment of IH, and it really is remarkably effective. It decreases the Epworth sleepiness score by over 10 points, which is truly a dramatic effect. Although the way the trial was constructed to bring Xywav to market, about 75% of people, this is the narcolepsy trial, by the way, about 75% of people responded. And similarly with IH, not everybody responds, but about 75% will respond. And it was the responders that were looked at during the duration of the trial. The non-responders were not included in the data set. So anyway, that gives you a background of oxybate therapy. Now, you may know there's a company called Avadel, which managed to uh, envelop the sodium oxybate molecule into this matrix. It's a delayed release matrix. So when you take it, the effect is you have this sort of gradual dissolution, and you have this release of gamma hydroxybutyrate throughout the night. So it's a once nightly product rather than a twice nightly preparation. So because of the once nightly preparation, the FDA granted Avadel approval, saying that it was superior to Xywav, and the fact that it was based on the fact that it was once nightly versus twice nightly. So Avadel has their product, which is called Lumryz, on the market, and that's proven to be quite effective for treatment of narcolepsy. They're also looking at this for IH, so they have a ongoing trial right now called the Revitalize trial, and this is looking at subjects with idiopathic hypersomnia and giving them gradually increasing doses of Lumryz at the beginning of the night. So this is very. I'm sure that they're going to get approval. They right now they don't have an open label extension, but they have the basic trial ongoing right now. So yeah, they're definitely looking for people to participate in this. Now, what else is out there? So you may know that Harmony, which has a drug called pitolisant, they looked at treatment of idiopathic hypersomnia. So pitolisant, the other name for it is Wakix. So the way this works is it increases histamine in the synapses in the brain. It does this by blocking the reuptake of histamine, and also increasing release of histamine from the neurons in our brain. So so Wakix is approved now for narcolepsy. It's also very effective for treatment of cataplexy, reduces cataplexy events by about 75%. So it's really quite a good alternative for. And the other unique thing about it is it's non-scheduled. So that's a big advantage in the fact that it's easier to prescribe than the typical scheduled medications. So pitolisant, unfortunately, because of their trial design, it did not show efficacy for treatment of idiopathic hypersomnia. In other words, it didn't meet their primary endpoint, which was the change in the Epworth sleepiness scale. Now, that doesn't mean the drug wasn't effective. It just means that the trial design was flawed, so that they didn't meet their primary endpoint. So Harmony is in the process of petitioning the FDA because, first of all, there's a huge unmet need for treatment of people with idiopathic hypersomnia. There's only one drug approved right now, so there's really a need to approve other medications. So the Harmony is hopeful that they will eventually get pitolisant approved for treatment of idiopathic hypersomnia. So anyway, that's out there. So Axsome, as you know, has a drug called Sunosi. The other name for that is solriamfetrol. So solriamfetrol is approved for treatment of excessive sleepiness associated with narcolepsy, as well as obstructive sleep apnea. And they're looking solriamfetol for treatment of multiple other indications, including idiopathic hypersomnia. Um, However, at present, the only IH trial for solriamfetol or Sunosi is being conducted in France. Eventually, they may conduct the IH trial here in the U.S., but as of right now, it's only being conducted in France. So, how does solriamfetol work, or Sunosi? So this is called a dopamine and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So it increases both dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain, thereby allowing people to stay awake much better. So, and they've got very good data both for sleep apnea, excessive sleepiness and sleep apnea, as well as narcolepsy. It doesn't have any effect on cataplexy, but it is I found it a very good drug. And the nice thing about Sunosi is that it has a duration of effect of at least 9 hours, which makes it very attractive for once daily dosing. So, plus, it is a very clean drug. It has a half life of about 7 hours, but it really doesn't interact with hardly any other medication. So, it's a very safe drug. It's excreted entirely by the kidneys. So yeah, it doesn't have any effect on birth control or other medications. Um, and let me back up and talk about modafinil and armodafinil. I was involved in those trials years ago. So, and when they were approved, really these were breakthrough medications. So modafinil is a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. It increases dopamine in the synapses in our brain, and it was truly a much better alternative for a lot of people than the stimulants, which were the only treatment that was available prior to that. So armodafinil came to the market in about 1998, and then subsequently armodafinil, which is Nuvigil, was released. Oh, geez, probably 6 or 7 years after that. So that it and the only difference between modafinil and armodafinil is that the duration of effect of armodafinil is somewhat longer. Modafinil is typically dosed twice daily, whereas armodafinil is just a once daily dosing usually. So it's armodafinil is a longer duration of effect, probably about very similar in efficacy to modafinil. The problem with both of those drugs is they do decrease the efficacy of birth control, so they have to be used in caution with people on birth control medications. But yeah, I still find them quite useful. They're not as powerful as stimulants in terms of promoting wakefulness, but they're a pretty good first step in a lot of people for treatment of excessive sleepiness. But again, they're dopamine reuptake inhibitors. They act exclusively by increasing dopamine in the brain. So so what's on the horizon? The big thing, as you all know, is what's called orexin agonists. So orexin again is the sort of the master neurochemical that stabilizes sleep and wakefulness. And orexin interacts with other neurochemicals in the brain, specifically norepinephrine and dopamine, to enhance wakefulness and to release these other neurochemicals. So it turns out that type 1 narcolepsy patients have a deficiency of orexin in the brain. So this is a very unique population of patients. They have a well-defined pathophysiology in that we know that the primary problem they have is a deficiency of orexin. So if you think about it, there's the average human brain has about 60 billion neurons. That's the average human brain. So and only there's only about 50 to 80,000 neurons in our brain that produce orexin. So it's really a tiny number of neurons, considering that there's 60 billion neurons in our brain. And these orexin producing neurons are located in the lateral hypothalamus. So it's thought that because of an autoimmune process, these orexin producing neurons in people with narcolepsy type 1 uh, are destroyed. And it's thought that sometimes this can be triggered by a infection of some sort, so certain viruses or certain vaccines or certain bacterial infections may trigger this autoimmune reaction that in susceptible people uh, cause destruction of these orexin producing neurons. So, so for whatever reason, these people with type 1 narcolepsy have a very diminished amount of orexin, or in some cases, almost complete absence of orexin. Now, the only way to measure orexin is through a spinal tap by measuring it in cerebral spinal fluid. You can't measure it in the blood, but the primary manifestation of type 1 narcolepsy is excessive sleepiness, but very frequently these people also have cataplexy, which is transient muscle weakness, often stimulated by emotional or caused by emotional stimulation. So, and this obviously can be quite bothersome if you have these repeated cataplexy attacks. So anyway, that's what defines type 1 narcolepsy. The cataplexy plus the excessive sleepiness. There's adjunctive symptoms. By that I mean there's disrupted nocturnal sleep. Some people have this what's called hypnagogic hallucinations. That is, they hallucinate after shortly after falling asleep. They may have sleep paralysis where they wake up and feel paralyzed, like they can't move. So all these ancillary symptoms may also occur in type 1 narcolepsy. So type 2 narcolepsy, as you probably know, is different in that these people have normal orexin levels. So it's really not quite clear what causes type 2 narcolepsy. And similarly, with idiopathic hypersomnia, we really don't understand the mechanism that causes excessive sleepiness in people with idiopathic hypersomnia. All these various neurochemicals that have been measured in the cerebral spinal fluid in people with IH are normal. So it's not really clear. And as you probably know, there's significant overlap in the diagnosis of type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. And that if you do repeat testing, that is an overnight polysomnogram and a multiple sleep latency test, oftentimes people with idiopathic hypersomnia will, upon repeat testing, have narcolepsy type 2 and vice versa. And interestingly, if you follow people with idiopathic hypersomnia over time, this is based on some European literature, about 20% of people with idiopathic hypersomnia will have resolution of their symptoms or have some other diagnosis. So it's yeah, it's very interesting. We still really don't quite understand the mechanism behind idiopathic hypersomnia, and there's probably different phenotypes. There's the long sleeper type of idiopathic hypersomnia is probably a distinct phenotype or different population as compared to the idiopathic hypersomnia group that has normal sleep. Anyway, so it's now thought that there's substantial overlap between type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia, but the long sleeping group may have a different pathophysiology relative to the people that sleep a normal length of time. So with that, let me just dive into a couple of the trials that are upcoming for looking at these orexin agonists. So Takeda was really the first company to develop an orexin agonist. By what do I mean by orexin agonist? So that means that these companies have developed molecules that bind to the orexin receptors, so they produce the same effects as orexin. So Takeda was the first to develop such a molecule, and this was quite a feat because there's something called the blood-brain barrier, where these chemicals have to cross this blood-brain barrier to enter the brain. So developing a chemical that can do that is really quite a feat. So that it was very amazing when Takeda developed such a drug. So they were the first one to develop this, and their first iteration of the orexin agonist caused some liver problems. It caused increased liver enzymes, which is pretty much the death knell for the first iteration. but they developed a subsequent iteration of their orexin agonist that's now undergoing uh, you know, trials for both narcolepsy as well as idiopathic hypersomnia. So they've got upcoming trials. This is TAK 861 is the name of the molecule, and it looks very promising. And there's another company called Alchemies that also has an orexin agonist, and probably either Takeda or Alchemies will be first to market with the orexin agonist. So, and then, again, this is they work in very unique ways. It turns out that people with type 1 narcolepsy that are deficient in orexin are extremely sensitive to these orexin agonists, so that lower doses will be used for people with type 1 narcolepsy versus people with type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. So people with type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia will need higher doses, again, probably because they don't have a complete deficiency of orexin, as do people with type 1 narcolepsy. So anyway, these different doses are going to be looked at in people with IH as well as type 2 narcolepsy. But I would say Takeda and Alchemies have uh, their programs are the most advanced right now. Centessa is also a company that's looking at orexin agonists, and they've got a very potent orexin agonist called ORX 750, and they've got a trial right now called Crystal One, which is just beginning. So they've got some early phase data that looks very promising, and they're going to be pursuing idiopathic hypersomnia as well as types 1 and type 2 narcolepsy in their clinical trials. So those are the three companies that are we're the furthest along in terms of developing orexin agonists. Now, the other companies that are also looking at orexin agonists, there's a lot of activity in this space. There's Eisai, it's a Japanese company. They've got their own orexin agonists. Merck has an orexin agonist. Jazz has an orexin agonist. They're going to be developing, looking at first people with narcolepsy, but eventually I'm sure they'll also look at IH. And then Harmony also has an orexin agonist in development. I can tell you also, Harmony's got a high dose pitolisant, and they're going to be looking at that for treatment of narcolepsy and probably idiopathic hypersomnia as well. So this is a much higher dose of pitolisant or Wakix than is what's currently available. And they've also got a gastric formulation that is going to be a little more tolerable in terms of minimizing GI side effects. One of the biggest problems with Wakix or pitolisant right now is that it can cause nausea as it's currently constituted. But they've got this gastric preparation that'll minimize GI side effects, and they've got this high dose preparation that they're looking at. And clinical trials for that will be starting probably later this year. So there's a lot of activity right now in the narcolepsy as well as the idiopathic hypersomnia space. One company I forgot to mention is Zevra. They've got a compound, it's called KP1077. And it looks like that's basically a formulation of methylphenidate, which is similar to Ritalin. But the unique thing about that is it's a delayed release formulation, so that it will be taken in the evening and will not be fully absorbed until the next morning. So it will be really it'll be released, probably 8 to 10 hours after it's taken. So this will enable people to awaken better in the morning. And as you know, this is one of the big problems with idiopathic hypersomnia, the sleep inertia. So that's out there, and I expect that they will eventually get approval. So anyway, that's an overview of the trials that I know about. Again, the orexin agonists are going to be really a big deal in upcoming years, and I would think that we'll see the first one on market probably in a couple of years, and this will be a game changer. Stimulants are still commonly used for treatment of both narcolepsy as well as idiopathic hypersomnia. and you all know the baggage that are associated with the stimulants. That is increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, a lot of anxiety symptoms. So, the orexin agonist will be a completely different approach. And I suspect that, most people with narcolepsy and IH will still need more than one medication to fully treat all of their symptoms. So, oftentimes we use a cocktail of medications to treat people with narcolepsy as well as idiopathic hypersomnia. For example, we may use an oxybate to help address disrupted nocturnal sleep. And then we may use a wake promoting agent such as Wakix or Sunosi. Or in the future we may use an orexin agonist in addition to oxybate therapy. So there's going to be a variety of drugs at our disposal to help minimize symptoms with associated with narcolepsy as well as IH. So with that overview, I'm happy to answer any questions, general questions, and not. I don't want to talk specifics about diagnosis or treatment, but if you've got some general questions, I'd be happy to open up to anything you'd like to ask.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bruce. While people are putting out a few questions, I did just want to ask if we could take like a step back, if you could just go over like a very brief, like the phase, remind us what phase like the trials are, phase one, phase two, phase three. And you had mentioned open label extension. Like, what are some things that, some tools or some thoughts that you would kind of plant for someone thinking about a clinical trial? What might they come to you or to another trial site with questions about?
So, so the big advantage to these trials is that geez, you get to try new medication, and there's very careful surveillance during these clinical trials. In other words, there's intense scrutiny for safety parameters. We monitor blood pressure and heart rate, and as well as blood testing. And these studies are very carefully designed to maximize safety. And obviously, we're also looking at efficacy. So in some cases, we're looking at subjective parameters like the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, and sometimes we do maintenance of wakefulness testing, which is sort of the opposite of the MSLT. In the maintenance of wakefulness test, we have people lie down in a dark room and try to stay awake over a period of 5 nap opportunities, and we measure how well they're able to maintain wakefulness during these nap opportunities. So there's both subjective and objective measures that are conducted during these clinical trials. Uh, some of the trials, like Takeda, is probably the furthest along. Alchemies is close behind. They're in phase 2 and phase 3 studies. I think they're further along with narcolepsy than they are for IH. Usually narcolepsy is the initial target. So a lot of these trials are phases 2 or 3. I think Takeda's in stage 3 right now, phase 3. Centessa's a little earlier on. They're doing phase 1 and phase 2 testing. Um, so yeah, these trials are all in various different phases of development. Um, and some of the things that I've mentioned or have already been released to the market. Obviously, Wakix has been on the market for a few years, as well as solriamfetol or Sunosi. Uh, by open label extension, I mean after the trial is concluded, uh, some of these trials offer the possibility of staying on a stable dose of medication until the drug is approved. So that's called an open label extension uh, trial. So and again, every trial is different, but some of these trials I would expect to have open label extension opportunities, which will enable people to stay on the medication if they choose to do so. The biggest disadvantage to these trials is that oftentimes we require that people uh, stop their current medication. Oftentimes, antidepressant therapy is not allowed in these trials. People have to be relatively healthy. They can't have major health conditions to participate in these trials. And they can't be taking anything that causes sleepiness or that promotes wakefulness during the course of the trial. These trials are of various lengths. Most of them, I would say, are you know 1 to 2 months in duration. Sometimes they last a little longer, but they're relatively short. They pay very well, for subjects that are interested. These IH, as you know, is a relatively uncommon diagnosis. Although, if you look at current diagnostic criteria, Emmanuel Mignot looked at a data set called the Wisconsin Sleep Cohort. This is a group of normal state workers in the state of Wisconsin that underwent overnight polysomnogram followed by multiple sleep latency testing, and they found, based on the current diagnostic criteria, about 2 to 3% of that cohort or population of normal subjects met criteria for diagnosis of IH. So IH is probably very underdiagnosed based on the current criteria set forth by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. So it's somewhat of a diagnosis of exclusion, but I think it's very underdiagnosed based on the diagnostic criteria they're currently set forth. But anyway, so there's opportunities to participate in these trials. Oftentimes the uh, the sponsors of the trials, the drug companies, will pay for transportation as well as pay very handsomely to participate in these trials. Because it is, it's not easy to come off medication to allow people to stay awake. That's the single biggest challenge we have is, yeah, trying to have people come off their medication for a period of time. Usually, depending on what medication it is, they may have to be on it, be off their medication for several weeks prior to entry into the trial. And then there's also a possibility that people may get placebo during the course of the trial. Oftentimes, the likelihood of getting placebo is around 30 to 40%. So there's a possibility that people may get placebo. But again, if they choose to drop out of the trial or to to pull out their pull their informed consent, they're free to do so. These trials are voluntary, but they're very important, because in order for any of these drugs to achieve FDA approval, enough participants have to enroll in the trials to make the data meaningful. So it's very important part of the whole clinical drug approval process to do these clinical trials and to enroll people that are willing to participate, as well as follow all the dictates of the protocol. So yeah, we definitely encourage people, if they have IH, or if they know of somebody in their friends or family that have IH, or for that matter, narcolepsy, we encourage them to get the word out to help participate in these trials, because again, they're very important for scientific advancement.
Thank you so much. Great detail there. I had a question up here. Someone was asking a little bit about a potential for any sort of flamazanil like research. Make sure I can scroll back up and get here. Um, is there an update inside the medical world on competitive antagonists, not just flamazanil, but any of the options and insurance coverage opportunities for them? Your
So,
thoughts?
well, yeah. So flamazanil, the Emory group really has looked at this, and it's probably a very small subset of patients with IH that actually respond to it.
Mm.
It is interesting that there is, and because we don't fully understand the pathophysiology of idiopathic hypersomnia, we don't really know what's the optimal drug that might be the magic bullet for people with IH. But clomazamil works for a small number of patients. At least, yeah, Lynn Trotty is one of the the people that have been heavily involved in this. But it really clinically, gosh, I've given it to a few people. It really hasn't. I haven't seen much response, but and if you look across the globe, other sites have not been able to replicate the data from the Emory group. So I'm sure there's a small subset of patients that may respond to it. Um, there's a company called Balance uh, Therapeutics that's looking at what's called a GABA A antagonist. So GABA, as I mentioned, is one of the neurochemicals in our brain that promotes sleepiness. So it's thought that if you have a medicine that antagonizes this receptor or limits the effect of GABA in the brain, that may promote wakefulness. So Balance Therapeutics has got a drug called pentatrazole, which is a GABA A antagonist, and the theory is that may promote wakefulness. Now, Balance did a trial a number of years ago to look at a similar drug, and it really didn't meet endpoints, so it wasn't efficacious for most of the patients that participated. But there may be a subgroup of people that may benefit from such a drug. But in my experience, and from what I've read in the literature, the GABA A antagonists, you know, uh, like a flumazenil, may not be all that effective for most people with IH.
Yeah, I believe I heard Dr. Rye talk a little bit about it, and he had referenced just so many different genotypes that present with potential IH, or the phenotypes, and then potential genotypes that may only respond to that, but the number being relatively small compared to the overall population. Um,
Yeah, and it's hard to identify those people as well. It's there isn't any specific blood test that would indicate who
mhm.
respond and who might not. So it's really the only way to find out is to give people a trial of flumazenil. And I think I don't think the drug itself is all that expensive, but yeah, it's just cumbersome since it has to be delivered intravenously. Um, but anyway, I don't think that's going to treat the vast majority of people with IH epilepsy.
Yeah, great points there. Um, Someone had a question a little bit about the histamine inverse agonist or pitolisant, and they were just the question was, is there any concern that those might potentially exacerbate like an autoimmune disorder or someone who may be sensitive? I know there's different types of histamine that are being antagonized versus your typical histamines in the blood. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so no, it doesn't exacerbate any allergic type conditions. So this is a centrally acting drug. It acts in the brain, so it doesn't it wouldn't be uh, cause a generalized histamine reaction in the body. It just is a psychoactive drug that works in the brain, not elsewhere. Um, Although, if you take an antihistamine, like, for example, Benadryl, which can penetrate the brain and cause sedation, that can counteract the effect of pitolisant. So, yeah, first generation antihistamines like diphenhydramine, which is Benadryl, can counteract the effects of Wakix or pitolisant. But no, it wouldn't. Pitolisant doesn't precipitate any uh, reaction, immune reaction. So, and as I said, I think the high dose preparation really is going to be, it's very interesting. I think that might really provide a lot of additional benefit versus the currently available dose. The highest available dose of Wakix or pitolisant is 35.6 milligrams, and the high dose is going to be more than double that. Uh, so that trial is going to be undergoing or starting fairly soon, probably later this year. So they're looking at the effects of the high dose pitolisant. I think it'll probably be much more effective than the current dose.
Great detail there. I have a few questions, a little bit um, more personal, but we'll probably hold on for some of those when we have the breakout groups after you've departed for the evening. I do want to be sensitive to your time. Do you have time for a few more questions here?
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. One question I thought had some nice broad applications, but could you just do a little bit of compare and contrast your typical stimulants versus, your wakefulness promoters like a modafinil or modafinil Sunosi, just kind of a high level overview that might
Yeah,
address a question I was asked.
yeah. So the stimulants in the by far the most common stimulants are the amphetamine preparations like Adderall, and then the methylphenidate, which is Ritalin type preparations. So the amphetamines cause a really a massive release of dopamine in the brain. They cause the neurons to dump a lot of dopamine in the brain. So it really lights up the brain very effectively, these stimulants. The problem is that they can also cause a lot of anxiety in some people. They cause appetite suppression. In fact, Adderall. Interestingly, the Adderall was first developed as a weight loss drug. It was initially it was called Albatrol, and then a guy named Roger Griggs in northern Kentucky bought Albatrol, and he recognized that it helped people maintain focus. So back in the mid 90s, he started marketing this uh, for treatment of attention deficit. At that time, there wasn't even an official diagnosis of attention deficit disorder. So uh, anyway, he renamed the drug from Albatrol to Adderall, and Adderall stands for ADD for all. That's how he derived the name ADD for all, Adderall. So then he did the clinical trials and demonstrated that Adderall, which is a amphetamine combination of dextroamphetamine and amphetamine, was quite effective in helping people maintain attention and focus. So he got approval back in the mid '90s for Adderall as a treatment for ADD. But it obviously had been used prior to that time for treatment of excessive sleepiness, off label, and then of course methylphenidate or Ritalin was also used for that purpose. So these drugs cause massive release of dopamine and to some extent norepinephrine in the brain. And they increase heart rate, increase blood pressure, um, and over time could potentially increase risk for cardiovascular problems. So when modafinil came to market, it came to market about 1998. It was officially approved. That was superior in that it's called a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. It selectively increased dopamine, but it didn't cause the massive release of dopamine that the stimulants do. So it was a significant advance at that time. So modafinil or Provigil was first approved, and then subsequently years later, armodafinil or Nuvigil was approved. They're both dopamine reuptake inhibitors, so they increase dopamine, but to a much more limited extent than do the stimulants.
Very good. I have one question here too that yeah, I've attempted to address, but want to make sure that you get a chance to touch on it. But it was about long-term oxybate use. Is there any concern that you've seen? Um, I cited its approval since 2003 and its use off-label since the 60s. But is there any concern about long-term use of any of the oxybate medications?
The answer is no. Geez, I've had people that have been on oxybate even before it was approved in the U.S. And to give you a brief history of oxybate, so it was up until around 1990, you could go into a health food store and buy gamma hydroxybutyrate over the counter, and then it gained notoriety as the date rape drug because when gamma hydroxybutyrate is mixed with alcohol, it causes profound sedation. And that is because it interferes with the metabolism of alcohol. So it causes the alcohol concentration in the blood to be higher and last longer than it would without the combination with GHB. So GHB really mixed with alcohol really puts people out. So it was used in that context as the date rape drug. So it really it had a negative connotation. So it was completely taken off the market. It was completely unavailable between about 1990 and 2002 when it was approved by the FDA for treatment. The original indication was for treatment of cataplexy, and then subsequently was approved for treatment of excessive sleepiness associated with narcolepsy. So for that time frame, that was over a decade when it was unavailable, and there were patients that were going up to Canada and getting it in Canada and bringing it back. But yeah, it was unavailable in the U.S. up until about 2002. So it's been out since 2002. Yeah, sure, there are potential safety concerns. Obviously, it should not be mixed with alcohol. If people take it either, especially if they're taking the twice nightly preparation, either if they take it either too early or too late. If they take it too early, that is within less than 3 hours of the first dose, people can potentially overdose. In higher doses, it can potentially cause respiratory depression, can increase risk for falls if taken, especially if it's taken too early. If it's taken too late, it can cause next day sedation. Um, there is some weight loss, typically or often associated with the use of the oxybate products. Usually not a huge weight loss, but usually in the range of 5 to 10 pounds. We can see that. Nausea is by far the most common adverse effect. But interestingly, the adverse effects are more common at lower doses as compared to higher doses, because when you get to 6 grams or more, it really is very sedating and puts people out, so they don't have the adverse effects that are seen with the lower doses. So it's still the most effective drug for treatment of all the symptoms of narcolepsy. Now, it'll be interesting to see how it compares or how it will be utilized in with respect to the orexin agonists. But I suspect that we'll still have to use some, something to promote wakefulness during the day, as well as something at night to suppress disrupted nocturnal sleep, which is often associated with narcolepsy. Of course, we don't see the disrupted nocturnal sleep with IH, but the oxybates have been incredibly effective for a lot of people with IH. Again, about a 75% response rate to the oxybate products. So anyway, yeah, I think oxybates are going to be around and still will be important part of the treatment regimen.
Yeah. This has been some great details and great information. I did just want to thank you. Probably could ask you questions for another hour and a half, but I feel like that would be a little bit too much. So I did want to give you a hearty thanks and appreciation. How can people reach out to you if they're looking to visit your clinic for a clinical trial?
So I'm located in Cincinnati. We welcome participants, and again, I mean, geez, these drug companies will often provide transportation to the nearest site. So anybody on the East Coast that's interested in participating in a IH or narcolepsy trial, we welcome participation. So my research site is called Intrepid Research in Cincinnati. So if you Google Intrepid Research, you'll find us. And yeah, we've got a lot of trials that are ongoing or upcoming. So we welcome participation. We try to update our website with the latest trial information. But yeah, if you Google Intrepid Research in Cincinnati, you'll find us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For the rest of the audience, I just wanted to remind you guys that we will have a 30-minute breakout session where we talk a little bit more about maybe some personal questions or thoughts about this. But again, Dr. Corser, I cannot thank you enough. Look forward to seeing you at in Seattle at Sleep, and cheering you on along the way, and perhaps even reaching out and making an appointment myself. So again, thank you so much for everything. Greatly appreciate your time, and for
Great.
being so generous with the
Great,
questions.
great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take care.